About a book, actually. So it's a book by a guy called Thomas Szasz called The Myth of Mental Illness. Now, it was written in the, I think, 1960, and it was quite provocative at the time. So within this, I'm going to use the term psychiatry. Now, psychiatry in this sense, when it's written, and in this world, if you like, it encompasses everything to do with the treatment of mental illness. So it's medicine and psychotherapy, not just in the narrow form that we use it today in terms of medicine. Okay. So, Thomas Szasz, who wrote the book, he was a Hungarian-American psychiatrist. He was alive for most of the 20th century. He was a big critic of what he called coercive psychiatry. So, essentially that's the kind of psychiatry where you've got the one-up authoritative position. So if you think about the kind of clinician who can decide whether someone's sectioned involuntarily, basically against their will, it's that kind of thing. And yeah, when he wrote this book, there was quite a divide. Some people thought he was a hero and some thought he was an absolute heretic, but he definitely did change the whole, the course of psychiatry. So we're going to talk about his main ideas from this book. We're going to talk about the criticisms and then a synthesis of both and where I think it lands. Everybody cool with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So his main argument is that mental illness isn't actually a disease, it's actually communication. Okay, so he had a big thing about when you're looking at bodily disease, you're looking at pathology, you're looking at something visible, like you're looking at a tumour or some kind of infection or something you can see. Whereas he was saying that with mental illness, it's actually more of it's a communication. It's somebody communicating non-verbally and symbolically. Okay. He also said that mental illness is basically it's a social game. Now I know I talked previously about Eric Burns' games people play. He talks about there being the sick role. The person takes on the sick role, and then you get the healer. So rather than he was saying what we think we're doing or what the psychiatrist thinks they're doing is healing the sick person. He said no, you're actually that the sick person is they're playing a role within a social game, and adding the psychiatrist, you're just adding another player, another dimension.
Mm-hmm.
He also talked about how this idea of mental illness, it's just a way of labelling unwanted behaviour or deviance, as they used to call it, and being able to then control it. So if you think of a lot of the asylums, for example, back in the day, they were full of poor people and people who would just, they had deviant behaviours. They were like, stick them over there. So, the origins of mental illness. So, Szasz says that the origins of mental illness, they come from hysteria. So hysteria, I'm sure you've heard that term, basically means excessive emotionality, and it was often labelled the label was given to women, basically emotional women. It's probably now what we would call people if they have borderline personality or panic attacks and stuff like that. Pre-1800s, hysteria wasn't considered a mental illness. It wasn't considered a thing as such. It was just, it was actually considered malingering and fakery and a moral weakness. Then there was this guy called Charcot, who was a French neurologist, I think. He, in the 1800s, he did a lot of work with hysteria patients, and he campaigned to have it become a real mental, what do you call it? Diagnosis, like a real thing. Around about the similar time, this Austrian physician called Breuer, he worked with Freud, and he was like a mentor to Freud. Sigmund Freud, psychoanalysis. Mm-hmm. He was working with this hysteria patient called Anna O. You may have heard of her if you know anything about Freud. Mm-hmm. She had hysteria. He found when he spoke to her about her hysteria problems, she
became hysterical.
She got hysterical, and then the problems disappeared. And she actually coined the term the talking cure. She was like, wow, I talked about my problems and they disappeared. This was really impactful for Freud, and he was like, wow, there's something in here. And that became the basis of his psychoanalysis, this idea of talking, it releases catharsis. That then, Szasz says, became actually the blueprint for all mental illness. Now the key thing about hysteria was they couldn't find any physical pathology. They couldn't find any physical tumour or anything. So it actually created this space where it was there's these unseen forces at play, which you could say is emotions and stuff like that. But that was the change, he argues. Before, pathology had to be something physical, some tumour, something you could see.
Tangible.
yeah, this then was like, there's something we don't understand here. It's also worth pointing out, Szasz doesn't talk about this, but at the same time what was going on was the asylums, like I was talking about. And there's this argument that even though they called it moral treatment, where they said basically we'll take these people to a nice big house in the country and we'll give them kindness and routine and discipline, and we'll find they get better. But the other argument was, yeah, but it was all the unwanted poor people, we'll just stick them over there. Okay, so the strengths of his arguments from this book, one is actually you could say that this looking for physical symptoms there are some good sides to that, because his argument was, otherwise you've just got these psychiatrists that are self-named, self-important, coming up with this mythology and like basically just based on speculation and deciding, yes, this is a mental illness because we've decided this is what it is. And we know that's kind of what Freud did a little bit. He had a cocaine problem and would sit creating crazy ideas. I mean, he was right about a bunch of stuff, but he also had some really mental ideas. That's not to say that there aren't necessarily unseen forces at play, because, you know, when Szasz wrote this book, for example, MRIs weren't even a thing. So we know now that there are things that could be detectable if you've got the right apparatus. He also had this thing about psychiatrists being judge priests. So the priest comes from, if you look at confession, confession is basically going to the priest and then you confess your sins and then the demons get released or whatever, or God forgives you and all of that stuff. But and they have the power to absolve you, right? You know, they speak for God. That's okay, Jesus forgives you or whatever. The Holy Spirit forgives you. But also psychiatrists had the ability to say, okay, you're mentally unwell, and that means therefore they could take your responsibility away from you. They could section you. The other side he actually was he disagreed with was the section, what's it called? The insanity plea. He said, if you think about it, that's the inverse. You're taking responsibility away from someone. You're saying, it's okay that you murdered those 3 children. You didn't know what you were doing. You were unwell. And he didn't think that was a very good thing.
Well, that's right.
How did he know?
Thought you got away with it.
Yeah.
So game theory is the other thing that I think game theory, I think, is the other thing that he had down. So he very much saw mental illness, like I said, as a, and I say game not just like people playing games as being silly, but that it's a social construct that someone takes up a role. Let me just check.
Is there something there as well that's like the anthropologist, where they're observing a foreign culture, but they're judging it by their own culture? I mean, the psychiatrists could have their own issues.
Yeah, and that's one of the arguments for if you've got the one-up position.
Yeah.
That, and especially if they're sick, and the issue is saying with this visible symptom, I can say, you can go, well, this is going down, and I go, but you see, this is your unconscious. But this is the, or these are the demons. This isn't Yuki, this is the demons, and I know because I'm in authority and you need to listen to me.
Yes.
And you get this thing where if you agree with me, it's because you agree with my authority and you're getting better. But if you disagree, well, it's the illness, it's the demons bad.
Yes.
So you get stuck.
Yeah.
So yeah, coming back to the game theory thing, I'm just checking my notes here. He was saying it's a way for the sick person or the person that's communicating distress to communicate that in a safe way. So for example, if you've got someone that's in, if I don't want to go to work, say because I hate my boss, or at work, let's say I'm supposed to be a doctor, but my dad wants me to be a doctor and I don't want to be a doctor. But to not be a doctor would really disappoint my dad. It's really difficult for me to go, hey, Dad, I don't want to be a doctor, I want to go be a farmer. But if I can't get out of bed and I'm mentally unwell, the demons possess me, well, that's a good reason. It kind of avoids, and this leads on to the sick role, because he said the thing about the sick role is it affords you certain benefits. You'll get sympathy and care from people, but you'll also get absolved from responsibility and blame. So it's not your fault, you're just unwell. No, it's okay, Dave, you can go back to bed. We know you murdered those children, but you're unwell. Just get some tea.
I appreciate you saying that, thank you.
Is that the same 3 children?
That's what you said.
Yeah, what happens in Bruce stays in Bruce.
Just because he had a bad weekend doesn't give him the right to kill children.
It's as if he's unwell.
Just the 6.
He was also a big proponent. He talks about a lot about ethical psychiatry. So, and basically his idea of ethical psychiatry was, it's an equal playing field. It's almost like, it's more like a customer service. It's not really customer service, but it's like there's equality. So I go to the psychiatrist, and he's a peer of mine. I can get advice. If he advises medication, I can take it, but it's a choice. He can't throw me in prison. Can't, it's that kind of thing. Right. Some criticisms of him. So, firstly, he had this quite rigid idea of disease. So it's either got to be pathology or it's got to be communication. But we know that's not always exact. Well, that's not always right. If you look at something like migraines or autoimmune disorders, their causes, there are arguably some physiological causes, but it's not always clear. Okay, so again, it's not quite as black and white. Again, this false dichotomy of behaviour, along similar lines, he was like, it's either behaviour, it's pathology. Well, actually, it could be both. For example, the person who's going through a psychotic break, they're going to be acting out strangely. Well, that's communication from where they're at, but it's also communication arguably based on what's going on for them physiologically. He overgeneralised a lot. Let me just check the notes here. So he used hysteria to generalise across everything, but we know, for example, with things like OCD, there are arguably some like hardware stuff going on in the brain, as well as the emotional things. So it's not necessarily. Oh, and there's heritability in some things as well, and then not just necessarily one gene. So again, is it fair to be completely black and white about it? He doesn't really consider the environmental effect. Now they know that with some mental illness stuff, for example, or mental health, if someone grows up among in a really stressful environment, it affects them developmentally. They have higher anxiety and depression scores, like through their life, and it also doesn't. There's also this. How do I put this? Where he talks about it being if you take game theory to like an extension, it suggests this idea of total choice. Like you can just choose to play your role differently, but the person who's grown up in a war-torn country, do they really have choice to just change something? Not necessarily. Okay, he's very much bangs on about how treatment doesn't work, or at least not medical treatment, but we know antipsychotics, for example, can work for people even in the interim. Maybe they're not always good long-term, but in the interim they can help. And we know that you give people therapy and it can make a difference. Now, okay, you could argue why that is, but still, it's not saying that you should just say treatment doesn't work. Capacity and competence. So nowadays, I think this has changed a bit. We rely a lot more on capacity. He was a libertarian, basically, Szasz. He was a guy that was very much like you should be able to be free and have your responsibility. But I'm sure you guys have all met people who don't have capacity, that it's because they're mentally, or because, Steve, not you.
No, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. Right.
I wasn't indicating me, I was helping you.
I'm just checking. Anyway, let me and the other thing is about weaponising the myth. So if you take it to the extreme, you could say it's your fault that you're not sick. You just need to grow up. You just
told me it wasn't my fault.
Well, exactly.
No.
But it's the other side.
Well,
of it.
which is it? You're now confused.
Right. Yeah. It's maybe not both. So, how do we synthesise the two? Well, for me, the middle path is modern thought talks a lot about the biopsychosocial model. Okay, so it's this interplay between biology, psychology, and your social environment. Okay, and all play a part. And the way I would phrase that in terms of game theory is all games have to be played within the pitch and the kit that you're given. Okay, so what I mean by that is there's two types of environment, right? There's the physical environment, what they might call your socio-economic environment. Like here, that we're at the Dukes, we're around this group of people. But then there's the mental environment, if you like. There's a person's, and that's, you could say that's their physiology and their perception. Okay, so that's what I mean by kit. So you've got the tennis player, they've got a, are they on a grass pitch or on a tarmac pitch, concrete, mud? But then also, are they wearing sunglasses in winter so they can't see anything? Are they wearing a big boiler suit when their opponent's wearing, shorts and a t-shirt in summer? They're going to be, they might be at a disadvantage and not even know why. again, something more psychological. If you've got a person that's grown up with massive trauma, they're going to have a different experience of a social group than someone who's grown up, with loving parents, for example. And then the last bit is brains and change. So again, for me, it's not either or, because we know neuroplasticity is a thing, and that means that you can rewire your brain. Some stuff you can't. We know temperament's pretty fixed in people after, I don't know whether it's from birth or after a certain age, but some stuff you can. The fact that you can change your emotional reactions to things, that you can change habits, means you're literally rewiring your brain when you do that stuff. So, that's it. Any questions?
Great picture of Steve and Dave there, look.
Yeah.